soon as, never mind. I guess we're going to start, people start loading up.
I see the attendee count going up, 36, 38. We're getting people. This is exciting.
Hello, everyone.
Going up fast now. Holy moly.
I was seeing the slide with our images on it made me realize I need to update my LinkedIn image from like 9 years ago.
Mine's the same picture from forever ago. I was at a trade show on the phone and somebody snapped a picture, and I've had numerous opportunities to get headshots taken since then, and I just can't do it.
Yeah, mine's from like a friend's college graduation.
All right, I'm gonna keep us on time and start.
It's still going up, so you might want to wait a minute. We're like 300 registrants.
Hey, Barb and Dave, welcome. Thanks for joining the call.
Yes. Everyone gets to hear us chatting away.
I thought that was the whole point of the virtual happy hour, was to hang out and chat with us.
Except they're all muted and we're chatting.
I got the chat up here. I can watch. I'm going to try and keep the chat off the whole time.
Okay. Oh, I always have it up. Yes, that was Mark crying, Dave. He doesn't. Hello, Barb. Hello, Alexis. Hello, Dave.
We're up to 72, 73.
All right. Well, we're giving it a 875 and going in. Okay, here we go. Hello, everyone. My name is David DiLorenzo of Association Analytics, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual discussion series, where we bring together leaders and learners each week in fun and engaging sessions aimed at optimizing business results and staying relevant in challenging times. Today's session is about creating relevant content with real-time data. Just a note to everyone that a recorded version of this webinar will be available. And please note that during the session, we want to hear from you. This is supposed to be an open forum. So please use the chat tool to connect with others on the webinar or anybody on the panel, and use the Q&A button to submit questions to our panel, which we'll field some of later on in the webinar. So now I would like to introduce today's presenters. Greg Pollock is the VP of Sales at Association Analytics. He's been working with associations and nonprofits for 15 years now, working for the Boy Scouts of America and a small association in Baltimore. He switched over to the vendor side and worked in implementation, product development, and finally in sales. He loves talking about technology and how it can impact a business, and also talking about cars. So you may see a cars background at some point in time. You'll learn a little bit about that in a few minutes. And he's joined by Kyle Contrata. He's the Director of Data Science and Event Technology for NAFSA, the Association of International Educators. He's a power user for Power BI, as well as Acumen, our data analytics product. He has great insights on how associations can leverage their data to provide better and more relevant and more timely content to its members. And for those of you who have jumped in since I started talking, welcome to our virtual webinar. Once again, it's creating relevant content with real-time data. Now, I'll turn it over to Greg and Kyle.
Thanks a lot, David. Can everyone out there hear me on the line? Yes, awesome, love it. So I've got the chat open here. Feel free to drop questions in. We want to keep this to be a conversation, which is a little challenging with 80 open lines, so we've got you on mute, but I've got the chat open here. If you have any questions or suggestions, drop them in there. We're also going to have a few call outs to the audience today throughout the presentation. So we'd like you to drop in your answers where appropriate. I do have some notes. We're going to try and keep this as conversational with Kyle and myself as we can. We've got a little bit of a structure. We want to make sure we stick to the right topics at the right time. So would you want to know right now what physical workshops you used to do in person should you convert to e-learning courses, right? Would you want to know what a member is likely to purchase from you? How about after they make their first purchase, what they're likely to purchase next? would you like to really understand what members are thinking? And it's not just what members were thinking 6 months ago or 2 years ago. It's probably right now, what are members thinking in the last 2 to 3 weeks? What were they thinking yesterday versus what they were thinking a month ago? These are the sort of topics we're going to be covering in today's session. And we're going to be talking about some analogs in actual life to help you understand the data science behind them. And then Kyle's going to be talking about the data science and the actual work he's doing right now, leveraging data to help unpack those topics and bring that insight to his organization. So these are the type of questions most associations could be asking prior to COVID. But now that we live in this COVID-19 sort of world, the answers we feel are even more valuable today than they were in the past. The kind of decisions you're making right now as an organization are going to have echoes down the road and are going to impact your business moving forward for the next several years. A few things to think about is your team has limited capacity right now. So what are the most important things you should be working on today that are going to impact your business? How do you create those priorities? And a lot of organizations make significant amount of revenue from their physical events, their physical courses, from things in person. Right now, people have to do online learning. They have no choice if they want to maintain their certification. And it's sort of pushing people to do things that they wouldn't normally do. We're going to talk about in a little bit. There are some people whose typical modality was a physical meeting, and now they're in the virtual world. So how do we keep that momentum going? And when we go back to having physical meetings, we still have a large portion of people who are attending our virtual meetings. How do we kind of diversify and make our organization more robust? That's what we're going to cover today in 3 primary topics. The first one we're going to talk about is a market basket analysis. Now, I'll get us started with the topic, and then Kyle and I are going to discuss how he did a market basket analysis for his organization. So what is a market basket analysis? The first idea is if you see, Greg in the shopping center, and he has put the Tostitos chips in his shopping cart. You might say, well, it's pretty obvious what other items on the list here Greg is going to purchase. He's probably not going to buy the potatoes or the milk or the yogurt. He's probably going to be purchasing items that are related, right? I'm probably going to be buying the salsa, the margarita mix. These are the things that make sense to us. However, how do we translate this to your organization? It may not be as obvious for you what products and services and courses you offer really fit together for the members. So Kyle, I'm going to tag you in here, and I want you to talk to me a little bit about what you did with the market basket analysis. Don't forget to unmute yourself, buddy.
Just gotta be cautious of that background noise. So I think taking a step back with market basket analysis, the key thing here, you made a great point about chips and salsa and margarita mix, but what market basket analysis is really useful for is quantifying relationships between products that aren't obvious. So, you would expect to buy chips and salsa together, but you might not expect to buy, tortilla chips and, I don't know, cheddar cheese. So what it does is it allows you to quantify those relationships to identify which products belong together, which products have cross-promotional opportunities, and it becomes really important when you step into sort of the association world where relationships among products are infinitely less obvious. We don't really have a chips and salsa. We have workshops and e-learning courses and publications that may or may not, have obvious relationships with one another. And so, the purpose of the market basket analysis from us was to reaffirm our assumptions, if we had any, about which products go together. There are obvious ones for our association where we have thematic sort of knowledge communities, and so products within those knowledge communities sort of, are obviously going to belong together and have high association rules. But what we're really looking for is those relationships between products that don't necessarily fall into that obvious connection.
All right, good stuff. So what are the sort of inputs you would put into a market basket analysis? What are we looking for?
Yeah, so traditional market basket analysis looks at receipts. So you'll see this in retail a lot, like retail analysis. and they'll just look at what people purchased in a single transaction, and then that's where you get your chips and salsa. They're not really looking over time. The way that we did it, since we don't really have high volume transactions, people aren't buying 12 or 13 workshops all at once, we actually applied that logic to a 10-year period to basically look at Kyle bought these 12 things over this 10-year period, and we did that for I think 11,000 individuals is roughly what the data set was. So it gives you a lot of volume, which is what you need for market basket analysis. You need a lot of data points. So yeah, we did it, instead of doing it for a single receipt, we considered our receipt sort of everything purchased in a span of time.
All right, and then when we were talking on Tuesday about this, you said there were a couple of specific products you were looking at, e-learning and workshops, right?
Yeah, we wanted to look at this is our sort of professional catalog of products, our professional learning services. The two main product categories are our CEP workshops, which are your traditional in-person 4-hour, 8-hour workshop trainings, very hands-on, led by a cohort of certified trainers, things like that. And then our e-learning courses, which are on-demand digital offerings that cover some different topics, some of the same topics, but you can access them as you need, and they're completely digital. And so we wanted to sort of analyze the relationships between those two product lines as well as within them.
All right, so I get the idea of a market basket analysis. I understand what your chips and salsa are. What were the sort of preconceived notions you had going into this? And then were they upheld? Were they overturned? How did that work?
Yeah, what was interesting for us, one is that it did reaffirm strong relationships between workshops that sort of are in we'll call it a trilogy. Basically, you have your beginner, your intermediate, your advanced offering. So within those like triplicates, you had strong relationships. And then we also had fairly strong relationships, again, within the knowledge communities that I mentioned. So our education, our like study abroad, CEP workshops had strong relationships together. Our student advising programs had strong relationships with one another. But what we were what was particularly interesting for us is that there were no strong relationships between product categories. So CEP workshops are in person, none of them had strong relationships with any of the e-learning courses, which actually was fairly surprising to us, since the assumption was that like maybe format doesn't matter, platform doesn't matter, but it appears that the obvious is true. It's somebody, because we have with the e-learning courses, we sort of have that same trilogy style where we have an intermediate advising and an advanced advising. So you might imagine that they would be substituting, I would do an in-person training for my beginner course, and then I would do the online course for my intermediate, and then who knows what you do for the advanced, but that didn't really happen. You didn't really have people moving in and out of the particular learning format that they had. And so that tells us one thing, is that while the actual number that was spit out indicates that they're not truly substitutes for one another, they don't have a strong relationship. So of the 11,000 of the 11,000 people that we looked at, only 8% of them purchased from both product categories over the 10-year period, which indicates that there's probably there's no reason not to cross-promote products, because it's highly unlikely that somebody is going to take an e-learning course if they've taken an in-person workshop. So we can offer them the e-learning course at a discount and not really cut into our margins.
All right, so this is where my favorite part gets in, is what do we do with the data? And you had mentioned one thing is, we know that somebody who traditionally takes a physical course is highly unlikely to take a virtual course. Right. So if we sent them an invite to a virtual course and gave them a discount, we're not leaving any money on the table, because we're trying to diversify that population, right?
Correct, yeah.
Awesome. So there's some easy insight we can send to the marketing team. It also seems like we know that if Greg typically takes workshops, emailing him all of our e-learning in the newsletter might just be noise, and he's kind of like starts to tune us out. So how do we identify what's relevant for people is if we can say, you know, Greg typically learns online, Kyle typically learns in person. We should focus on what people typically like, right?
Right. Yeah. And so what it does then is it also, if you've ever been to Amazon, you know, you have your recommended. If you've ever been to any website that sells anything, they have their recommended for you. This analysis method is what underpins most of that. It tells you that if I bought this intro e-learning course, I should be recommended these other 2 courses because people tend to purchase these courses in addition. So you're not going to see a recommended for you. If I've taken an e-learning course, I'm not going to waste my time, as you said, recommending a workshop for this person because it's pretty unlikely that they'll take that workshop. We want to recommend to them other e-learning courses. What we might consider doing, as I mentioned, is offering a discount for them to try a workshop. That's something that we're particularly interested in exploring. And one other note, this is sort of market basket aside. We did learn that there's roughly about, in that 10-year period, on average, there was a 7-month period between transactions. So that tells us that if we are going to be doing this cross promotion or we are going to be doing this recommended for you, we should be really trying to get them to make that 2nd or 3rd or 4th transaction 7 months after the last action that they took. Doesn't make sense to market to them in the weeks immediately after to try and get them to do a transaction. That's a period maybe you do more customer service type stuff like, hey, remember this great time you had, or like, you know, here's some follow-up materials. But in terms of like getting them to try and transact again, that sweet spot is going to be right around 7 months according to the data.
All right, that's really interesting stuff. You mentioned that there was a small portion of population that crossed over and took both. Were there any insights that you were able to get out of that population?
I haven't looked into that population yet, but I do know that they account for 20% of the total revenue. So we want to find more of them. For that particular reason. They had about double the average spend over that 10-year period compared to the general population. So sort of phase 2, when we decide what of the actions that we have, which ones we're going to move forward with, I imagine one of them is going to be, let's find another 8% of these people. Who are they? How long have they been working in the field? What knowledge communities are they in? What are their jobs? Like, who are they? So that we can then market both products to them and really keep them engaged.
Great question. So it sounds to me like when we were talking, you know, you said sometimes the results uphold preconceived notions and sometimes they change the way we think, but also something you're looking for is like, what are the things that are anomalies that you don't necessarily fully understand that's a good thing to investigate. So it sounds like we've got a good population that takes physical workshops. We've got a good population that takes e-learning, but there's something about this crossover that we want to deeper understand because that is where 20% of our revenue comes from. How do we expand that even further?
Right.
Yeah. Hey, Kyle, this is David. I got a quick question for you from the chat. Are you guys anticipating, as you look at the 10-year history and you look at some of this over time, that the quote unquote new normal might upend some of this historical data with a lot of new trends? And are you going to account for that?
David, can you re-ask that and speak up a little bit? It sounds like you did a little. Thanks.
I got you. Okay. So the question was, we're looking at 10 years of history. Is what happened 10 years ago still relevant now that we live in a new normal? How do we account for potential changes that happen over the last 3 or 4 months as we're looking at a historical perspective of 10 years? And I'll give you a preview. We're going to talk about that in section 3. But Kyle, I wonder if you could address that for this specific analysis. Was that thought about?
Yeah. So, I mean, this analysis ended pretty much right before the COVID-19 pandemic really started. But the thing to keep in mind is that there's a few factors. Like, obviously, if we ran this analysis again next spring, we would have to try and see if there's a key difference between that time period. But, you know, the time between transactions for us, and this is going to be different for everyone, but for us, the time between transactions is 7 months. So unless COVID-19 expands for 6 or 7 or 8 months, if things don't get quote back to normal in that time period, you might see this time frame as an anomaly, and in that case, you would probably wouldn't include it in your analysis necessarily. You would exclude it. If it becomes the new normal, then things do change, but we can't really know. My gut is telling me that it'll be an anomaly. So we can't really take it too much into consideration, but I don't anticipate it sort of really skewing anything. But again, we'll know that when we rerun this analysis a year from now.
Exciting. I'll be interested to check in with you in a year and find out how that worked. Barb here had a question, and we didn't do we'll fix this for next time. It's always an improvement process. Barb had a question about the organization and the data used. Is this specific to you? This is industry averages. Can this apply to any association, or is this just the insights you found in your data?
Yeah, so this is the insights for our data. Like I said, like the time between the purchases for your workshops might be 4 months. It might be 3 months. So this is definitely like the data for us is specific to our organization. The methods are not. The methods are enterprise. Anybody can use them. We pulled most of our data directly from our data warehouse that we have with Association Analytics. And so it includes data from our AMS. It includes data from our event registration folks. And predominantly this data for our professional learning services come from those 2 data sources. There are a number of other ones, but most of our transaction data is from that. So if you have transaction data in 1 system or 2 systems, it's really just a matter of pulling it and then doing what's like translating it into a format so that they're the same and you can run the analysis on.
All right. Just looking at the clock, I want to transition to our next topic, but I do want to put a quick little asterisk here. Some of you on the phone might be thinking, this sounds really complex, and I don't have a Kyle. I don't know if I can do a network analysis. That's okay. What we want to stress today is these are the things that are possible with data and analytics. And if you're not to the place where you feel comfortable doing a network analysis, at least be at the point right before then where you value the data you already have, and you say, hey, we're going to want to keep this data around because we plan on doing this network analysis in a year or 2 from now. Make sure you have good data governance in place. Make sure you understand where your data is coming from, what you're doing with that data, how you're storing that data, and are you consistently storing the same thing? So if you changed an e-learning course to a web course from 5 or 6 vendors and tagged it in different ways, that I assume would have made this a lot more challenging for you, right?
Sorry, I didn't get that last part.
Yeah, so you said you pulled the data right from the data warehouse, which seems like that gives you a huge head start. If your organization didn't do good data governance over the last couple of years and you had to pull this from 5 or 6 systems, then you had to normalize the data because we use 3 registration platforms, I assume that would have added additional hoops for you.
Yeah, it would have been a bit more difficult. Still possible, but it would just the data science sort of standard is that you spend 80% of your time creating the data set and 20% of the time analyzing it. So that is something that you'll want to keep in mind.
All right, so good data governance is important. Let's talk about our next topic here. I found this really cool picture is a network analysis. So we're going to have a similar format here. I'm going to sort of give you a parallel of how to easily understand a network analysis. And then Kyle's going to talk about how he actually did a network analysis of his data. Now, your standard network analysis, you can think about from a social media perspective. And I'm going to use a parallel. David told you I was into cars, so we're going to dive into the world of cars for a second. So a few years ago, I picked up a Mazda Miata. If you don't have one, I recommend you look in them. They're amazing cars. What happened, though, is when I got a Miata, I met all the Miata people. So here's Alan. We're going to call him an influencer. He's a highly connected person in the Miata world. Meeting Alan, I then started to co-drive with Alan, and I got to meet all the other people in the Miata world. Well, this directly translates to Facebook, where I then joined a Facebook group called the DMV Miatas. That's the DC, Maryland, Virginia Miata Club. So now I'm in the DC Miata Club. This is what we're going to call a community, a group of people that an influencer helped me get in. Now that I'm in the Miata Club, you'll never guess what you do next. You start modifying your Miata. So if you're going to modify your car, you have to get parts for it. And you wouldn't be surprised there's another community out there where an influencer recommended I join this community to go find parts for my Miata. All right, now I've got a Miata and I've started to work on it and I'm meeting all these other people. Guess what happens next? You get a faster Miata. So then what happens next? You join the Faster Miata Facebook group, right? So all of this makes sense in sort of my physical world where I meet an influencer who talks to me about a community. I join that community. I meet other influencers and they recommend other communities I join. Kyle, I'm pretty sure I got this right. This is what we call a network analysis, is understanding the pathway to entry, the potential moves one person would go from one community to another. So here's the other part of this. I did not join the Mustang group. There's a little bit of a rivalry here. I did not join the local Mustang group, and I certainly didn't join the group for Mustang parts because that's not the pathway I was taking. I imagine there's someone out there, maybe even on the chat, who said, Miatas aren't for me, I'm a Mustang person. And you did join the Mustang group. You met your own version of Alan, and you took your own journey through the communities out there. So you had potentially different influencers, and you took a different path. And there's a fairly good chance we might have even crossed paths at a Cars and Coffee, where I was in the parking lot with the Miata, and you were in the parking lot with the Mustang. So there are potential connections we had, but we took different paths to get there. So in my world, from a network analysis, we defined influencers as people and communities as actual groups online. Kyle, when you did a network influence, what did you define as influencers and as communities?
Yeah, so that was a pretty good entry point. So the equivalent for us is take the groups, the Facebook groups. For us, we replaced those with our products, our e-learning courses or our CEP workshops. So that's what each of these little dots on this network show you. And then the colors basically differentiate between the Mustang people and the Mustang groups and the Miata people and the Miata groups. But what network analysis does is it basically, you input the nodes, you input the dots, and then it basically runs an algorithm that guesses what the communities are. So when you run a network analysis on social media, like what will spit out is, they'll color all of these nodes, these Facebook groups blue, and you'll look and you'll hover over them and see this is the Miata parts, this is this super fast Miata, and you'll know that this is the Miata group or this is the Mustang group. The little lines connecting the dots in this are the shared population of attendees or purchasers for these programs. And so what happens is it based on how connected the different nodes are, it assigns them into communities. And ours spit out 5 communities. And one is really obvious, that yellow kind of manila color down here is a pretty specialized, highly related group of workshops for international admissions. The black nodes are the e-learning courses. So it did a really good job of basically being like, these are our e-learning. These are different than everything else. These are the e-learning courses, which I didn't necessarily think would happen. The purple, pink, and orange are different communities of our in-person workshops. The orange are sort of our education study abroad content, while the pink are the really entry-level workshops, the ones that are sort of more evergreen and more accessible to everyone. And then the purple are the highly specialized workshops. So it was, and basically what it's doing is we're not feeding it anything that would define what communities they belong to. So what's really interesting at the output is like the things that surprise you. That's where you really find the nuggets of useful information about how to use this data. I hope that wasn't too dense.
No, that was perfect.
And then the other thing you do with a network analysis is you look for, quote, influencers, and influencers are, there's a number of ways to measure it, but basically you're measuring how many connections a node has. In this case, like how many other products is one of our products related to. And the way that, and for us, what we've kind of taken that to mean is that there is a core set of education opportunities that we have. And then so you sort of have content radiate out from there. You have your, I think as Greg put it the other day, you have your 101s, you have your 201s, you have your 301s, which isn't necessarily the way that we've positioned our products in the past. We've definitely positioned them by e-learning course or CEP workshop or by the knowledge community that they belong to. So that was a super interesting outcome of this analysis, is that it didn't really segment too much by knowledge community, which is sort of our traditional marketing vertical. It really segmented it by sort of course level.
So I think that's a really interesting insight. The initial assumption marketing was going off of is Greg takes the 101, then he takes the 201, the 301. We should promote a track to Greg because we expect him to follow that pathway. But what the data actually showed is Greg builds sort of a baseline of general knowledge at the 100 level. I'm taking woodshop and I'm taking science, right? And then I sort of level up and take the 200 level, and then I sort of specialize when I get to the 300 or 400 level. So did that, you said it surprised the marketing team. Did it change the way they sort of position the courses or they market them now?
We haven't had that conversation yet. But like they know that it has, like we have our set of outcomes. We haven't decided what we're going to do with them, but that is one of the options on the table for us.
And then talk to me about an influencer. What happens when you identify an influencer course? What do we do? What would you do with that information?
With an influencer course, it allows you have sort of more opportunities to provide recommended for you. Like you have a higher probability of getting them to convert to another action because there are so many different directions that they can go in based on like how connected that product is.
Yep.
So it's a good opportunity to really focus on getting them to transact again.
Awesome. I was, I don't know if you remember Choose Your Own Adventure books from back in the day. I was thinking a little bit about that when we were talking about this, and I was like, there are some pathways that don't lead to a successful member, and we want to push them down the successful pathways. Don't go in the scary basement. We know you're going to get trapped down there, right? Investigate the attic with the secret key in it. So is it similar in your data? Is that a good analogy for you? There are certain pathways we almost want to push members down because we know that that's a more successful pathway for them to make additional purchases down the road?
Yeah, I think that is something we're exploring. That's sort of another next step that we have that we're going to use like a different analytics model to do that. But yeah, I mean, there is a more optimized path that varies by person. And so the next step, like we're considering that sort of our customer journey, and we're really trying to hone in on what that is. And these influencers, unsurprisingly, are those sort of core courses, the intro level courses. And so they sort of mark the baseline for that journey. So really, really excited by the potential to optimize sort of like, okay, we know that like you're this type of person. So of the 28 options you have, like we know that these are probably going to be a better fit for you, so that's what we're going to recommend. That's sort of our next step. We'll see if it's successful.
I love data scientist is actually a science, right? So we go through a sort of experiment. We have some preconceived notions, we run the data to see if we back it up, and then we can test it next year. We can change the way we market or the way we package or discount things and see if we made a good decision or not based on the data down the road.
Yeah, I mean, the act of doing data science is scientific, but there is an art to it. And so, I'm not in the position to dictate to people what our outcomes are. So the way that we sort of do it, we run the numbers, we come up with this is what the data is telling us, and then we give it to our subject matter experts to be like, hey, what do you think about these ideas? These are some potential new products. These are the, positioning, the new marketing approaches we may be able to test and try out. And then we work with them to determine like what they're excited about, what they think would work, because they know their people better. Like
Yeah.
this machine, this model doesn't know the people, but it does just know it can sort of model their behavior, but behavior and true understanding of people and how our people work. That's really where your staff partners come into play.
That's really interesting. One of the things you shared with me that I thought was cool was the model doesn't always tell you why they're connected. It just knows that they're connected. I wonder if you could share a little bit, like, how can we trust the data if it doesn't tell us why they're connected? You know what I mean?
Yeah, so my mentality on that is, particularly in the cases where you're like, I have no idea why. Like there's, as I mentioned, our community model identified like all of our e-learning courses, and then one in-person workshop was included in there. And I have no idea what it is about this workshop that caused it to have such a strong relationship with the people that also take e-learning courses. But it raises some interesting questions. Is this a key candidate for our first digital workshop? And that's where you really touch base with your staff partners, because they're going to know the people that took these courses and the people that took this workshop better, and they may be able to answer that question a bit better. But it does provide you with sort of an interesting opportunity to try something new. But yeah, like I said, that's where you really kind of find the new products and the exciting things, is when you're like, this makes no sense, but something's going on here. And also, in some cases it's just bad data, but that's where it's my job to be like, oh, I know this was wrong. So it's sort of you're working with, there's two approaches to trying to determine, what might be causing that anomaly.
Love it. All right, we've got topic number 3 coming up, but I want to do a little bit of attendee interaction here. So we've covered 2 topics so far. The first one was the market basket analysis, and the second one was the network analysis. A couple questions, throw out to the group, answer one that you like, or answer your own question. Would you find that information valuable? But more importantly, from my standpoint, if the Kyle on your team gave you that information from the product bundles or from the influencer courses, what would you do with that? If you were the staff partner and he's sharing this information with you, how would you change your marketing? Would you bundle things together? Would you offer a discount to people? And then the same question there is, have you done these things? Or are there preconceived notions you'd like to test? Are there preconceived notions that when you started, everyone said, this is how it works? And you're like, I don't necessarily know if that's true. I kind of suspect this is going on, but I can't back it up with the data yet. So if you have any of those in your life, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll talk about them in a minute here. So topic 3 is something that I think is really cool, is the ability to take unstructured data and provide structure around it. And I was looking for the matrix background. I couldn't find it in time. I sort of think about it like that, is unstructured data is the idea that there's so much information, we can't see it. We can't see what the matrix looks like. We can only see that there's stuff flying by on the screen. The goal here is to put structure around that unstructured data, and at the same time, give you business outcomes related to that unstructured data. So we're gonna get a little risky here, and we're gonna see some live software I'm gonna show you in a second. Live software, everybody, you never know what's gonna happen. So I'm gonna jump out of PowerPoint and jump into Chrome. I'm gonna have to mute the chat for a second to get this to work. Awesome. So if everything worked, can you see top 20 search terms here? I muted the chat, obviously. Yes, okay, thank you. So this is data coming from an online community you may be familiar with. You might have joined today because you saw a post in that online community about this session. And this data goes back several years, and I wanna highlight sort of the perspective of data over time, but then also a question was asked, is the new normal different than the old normal? And I think the answer is yes, and I'm hoping we can get to that here. So these are the search terms that are popular over time. And hopefully all of us remember Mount GDPR here. This was back in 2018, where there was a big spike in search terms about GDPR. I think it's interesting anecdotally that spike immediately drops off after the requirement is passed. People freaked out about it and then stopped caring about it. there's a lot of little topics that have come up since then. But then we get to what's popular today is this giant spike right here. And this is going to be when the coronavirus pops up in the data. Interestingly enough, this starts to pop up early January. So people even in January in this community were asking questions about that. Now, cool thing about data is we can use filters and all that great sort of stuff. So we can say, show me only things that are greater than 2019 and hit apply. Boom, there we go. So now we can see, here's our coronavirus showing up in the data. Some other words people are searching for, COVID-19, coronavirus with a space in between it or not. But we also see that that's not the only thing on people's minds. People are certainly asking for that, and we should respond with content related to COVID-19. But we also see people are asking other things that may have not been as obvious. And one of those things here is force majeure comes up. So if you're not familiar, it's a legal term about getting out of contracts or negotiating things. What is your legal requirement? Oddly enough, this shows up here in the data. It also shows up in an email in my inbox. So here in the news, amid the coronavirus, people are asking for a clear understanding of force majeure and how do they deal with their meeting contracts. And that turned into content that is now on the website for people to consume. So the idea here is not only understanding what people are talking about, but what are people talking about immediately after we all started working from home. I need to know how to get meeting technology, how to get my speakerphone to work, how to get the lighting around me to look good. A couple weeks into this, like I've got my virtual meetings down. I've got a lot of other problems I have to solve. Now I'm thinking about work-life balance or how to not come back to my computer at 8 o'clock at night and pick up working again. Like these are the challenges I'm focusing on now. So Kyle, I wonder if you can share with us a little bit, were you able to see anything show up in the data for your organization and your educators when the work from home happened? And then how has that changed over the last couple of weeks as sort of the new normal got normal?
Yeah, ours is very similar. Coronavirus shows up very large in our little word cloud. But for us, a lot of the major things for our people had to do with airlines and changing flight plans, refunding flight plans, because the coronavirus, COVID-19 really sort of hit as our constituents are international education administrators. We're planning a lot of the spring study abroad trips, those things that happen over spring break and last for a week. Those were getting canceled. They have students abroad that they need to get back to the United States. They have international students here that, you know, if they go home for spring break, or even if they might not even be able to get out of the country. So it was a lot, having to do a lot with flights, and then a lot having to do with visas. So I think we're still dealing a lot with the visa question of things. There's a small blip, as we see here, in sort of like virtual and telework and how do I work remotely. That has sort of quieted down. So now we're still sort of in that the visa period, because we are beginning to sort of end the semester, but you have a lot of on-campus program that happens in the summer that is sort of up in the air. And then even, you know, there isn't really an end in sight for this. So people are already thinking ahead to fall 2020, when the semester's supposed to start again. Like, are we gonna have students on campus at that time? If not, like, do we move to digital for the first semester and then we move on? Like that, those are the questions that they're talking about now. Now that they've gotten that immediate, like, how do I live in this new normal out of the way, they have the space to sort of breathe and think about the future.
Good insight. So we can see directly how when ASAE saw this force majeure, they created an email, they had content related to it. What was your team's reaction when they saw the community data and it's changing? Was it taking existing content that you had and repurposing it? Was it creating new content? Was it changing marketing strategies? How did you tie the insights into content? And I know we talked about the concept of fast data in the past, where like this stuff is relevant today, we need to get on top of this. How did your team react? Was there the speed you needed?
Yeah, they acted pretty quickly. As a matter of fact, like, we have a regulatory guru, David, on our staff who everyone sort of goes to for all of those visa questions. Like the weekend, the night of that, things started really, from the bureaucratic standpoint, happening in the United States. He went ahead and said, okay, we need to get this website, we need to get a page on the site that is specific to visa regulations related to COVID-19. And so we have a page now that's accessible from the homepage, and I think every page sort of up at the top for you to access that has gotten like 150,000 hits over the last like 3 weeks, which is miles above anything that we have seen before in any of our content. So it's definitely like that is the primary resource that people are, yep, right there.
There at the top, can't miss it.
Yeah, so that's what people are sort of accessing. That's what they're coming to our site for. It's nice to know that they're coming to our site for that. And then obviously in our newsletter, we've had content updates on a regular basis. We have a weekly newsletter, but primarily that was the biggest outcome so far. And then we have some resources for dealing with global crises that we've sort of dug up. But yeah, this is the major resource that we've put forward as a result.
Cool. I'm wondering if, I assume everyone else on the call has some sort of COVID call out on their website. What other things have you done, and drop it in the chat here, to react in real time? Is it updating your team with newsletters? I've seen some organizations are having just like open Facebook webinars for people, or YouTube series where people can get updated information. Is there an expert you all out there tapped into to get information out really quickly to people? Share with us any tactics you've used or anything that you thought was novel that your organization did to try and get on top of this. I'm scanning back through the chat as I wait for that to come in. Chris here says, when I can, I always start with the influencers. They can do a lot of the heavy lifting for me when it comes to getting the word out. I think that's such a huge concept there. You know, Reggie talked about on the first virtual town hall we did, you know, if you ask an influencer, share this with 3 friends and have them share it with 3 friends and have them share it with 3 friends, you get the viral effect. Viral is one of those things that's so hard to capture, but if we can identify our Allens, right? If you can only identify your Allens and get him to meet all your new people when they first get started, he can help them as an influencer get into the club and join other groups. So how do you identify your Allens, and how do you connect him with brand new members? I can imagine that could have a huge impact on just getting members up to speed as quickly as you can. So in the chat, I see we have virtual coffee and connect sessions with local experts. Love it. Thanks, Justin. We've got newsletters, COVID resources on the websites, virtual events, and more. We've got Brian here. We have Thursday night chats that's peer-to-peer, so you can talk to each other and work through their suggestions. Love that. Business owners discussing related issues for their business, set up by size of company. So that goes back to filtering by demographics, pretty cool. We're doing town halls with panelists, virtual roundtables and discussions, so they can actually talk with each other using Zoom. I feel like we're all crushing Zoom servers these days. I saw they did a lot of updates for security, and the virtual backgrounds got enhanced pretty quickly because we're all at home now. So lots of interesting stuff there. Good stuff. One person talked about segmenting by demographic. So I showed this sort of search terms over time, but the other way we might want to look at this is search terms by demographic, or by job level, or by function, or by position, or by size, or by location. Kyle, I know we've talked in the past about how you have different main demographics, or people use your organization differently. Is there anything you've seen so far in the data, or any insights you have about the way different demographics have responded, or the way your organization has had to segment their response for different types of people?
We're definitely seeing a lot of newer people who don't have heavy engagement with us, engage with us both on our website as well as in our higher logic communities. And then we've seen a massive uptick in access to our online communities, asking roughly the same questions, but in particular our staff that deal directly with international students, so student advisors who are working with international students on college campuses, have been accessing resources at a slightly higher rate than other knowledge communities.
Okay.
So those are the two key things.
Awesome. Well, good stuff. Quick commercial for Bill is going to be doing a session with Evan from ASHA. That's going to happen on May 7th. And they're going to talk more about unstructured data. So they're going to talk about things like community data, survey data, abstract submissions, maybe emails to that info@yourorg.com. Call center web chat. If you have one of those chat with us on your website things, how do you do that? So that's going to be another virtual town hall we're having on the 7th that Bill and Evan from ASHA are going to run. I'm doing another one of these, so if you like this one, come join me again. I think it's on the 30th. I'm going to be joined by Liam O'Malley from Blue Sky eLearn, and we're going to talk about a toolkit on how to convert your physical event to a virtual event. It sounds like a lot of people in the call so far have got a good framework up and running. Liam and I are going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it from the data perspective, and then Blue Sky being an online learning platform, he's going to talk about all the different things he's seen. They've had a tremendous spike in inquiries recently from everyone scrambling to get on top of this. And he's going to talk about some of the insights he's got from talking to all those people, some of the insights he's got from actually how to run virtual events and how to make them successful. So we're going to wrap it up here. One quick thing Kyle wanted to make sure we talked about is some of this stuff sounds challenging. And if you don't have a data scientist or you're not currently doing these sort of things, what resources you might want to access to be able to get started. And Kyle said, you know, this isn't as hard as it sounds once you sort of get the framework and understand it. I wonder if you could break some of these resources down, and then we'll send this out as a follow-up to the webinar today.
Yeah, so the top 4 links are definitely like if you're completely new to this or you have someone in mind who's completely new to this. Those are some either free or affordable options for really getting a baseline. I did all of this analysis in Python, which is a programming language. It's pretty ubiquitous at this point, and it's fairly user-friendly in like the way the language works. So it's definitely like all of those resources will give you a good baseline. For those that might have people that are familiar with some of these concepts or familiar with Python, the links under resources for this content in this presentation, those were sort of the baselines for what I used to get my market basket analysis and my product network analysis to work. And a lot of these cases, like those links, they're like, these are people that have like code that works for their data, and you just have to kind of manipulate it to work for your own inputs. So anybody that is familiar with working with data should be able to do that.
Great, thanks for sharing that stuff. And we'll make sure that everyone who attended, we'll send a copy of the recording today, and we'll make sure you get a copy of these links as well, so you can click on them as opposed to having to type in the E7C27 thing. I'm gonna turn it back over to David, our moderator, to talk about the series and upcoming events we have going on. David, are you able to jump back on?
I'm on. Thanks, guys. That was great. Well, we really hope all of you had a great time today and learned something, and we hope that you can join us in the future for more of these discussions. A couple things about the series. To keep it simple, we created this as a recurring meeting. So you see everything on the schedule. You have access to attend any of our future meetings. You'll get a weekly notification with the instructions to join the meeting, and you can add that easily to your calendar. You're welcome to join any of these sessions that you find interesting, and we'll keep them up to date on the website. Those can always be found at associationanalytics.com/virtual. If you're unable to attend any of them because you're registered for the series, you can check out the recording, which will also be made available on demand to everybody who's registered. And then for next week's installment in this series, we're going to have a session where we're going to look at ways to diversify and optimize your association's revenue streams. One of A2's analysts, Jenny Graves, will give some practical tips and advice on how to get the most from the data that you currently have. And she'll be joined by Ryan Conover, the CIO of the Oncology Nursing Society, and they'll share the planning and implementation process for a new content subscription service that they're doing. And finally, one of our partners at Feather will teach us how to get started with digital sponsorships to generate new revenue and provide relevant content to members. So once again, thanks to Kyle and Greg for an outstanding conversation. Thank you all for taking some time to join us. It was a fabulous discussion, and we hope to see you all next week and many weeks in the future. Stay safe.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.